Hi, I'm Will Johnson, also known as Power Nerd Insights. I work as a Senior Power Platform Specialist for Vantage 365, and I'd like to welcome you to this Power Nerd presentation. Okay, so welcome everyone to this week's session. We are obviously doing my first model-driven app this week, continuing on my first series. My name is Will Johnson, also known as Power Nerd Insights. I'll be hosting the session today, and yeah, we'll be going through a few things for model-driven apps. By way of introduction, as I've said, I'm Will. I've been a senior Power Platform developer for close to 5 years now, and I'm now head of Power Platform working for a company called Vantage 365. I've delivered on multiple different types of solutions using pretty much every part of the Power Platform, everything ranging from kind of Power Automate all the way through to Copilot and chatbots. So I had a fair bit of experience with it. And we host these sessions in the Power Apps Challenge as a way to teach and give people the tools and capability to be able to leverage and use this kind of tooling wherever they might be and maybe make their lives a little bit easier. In terms of a bit of ground rules for these sessions, I'm only really have one ground rule, and that is that there is no such thing as a stupid question. We've all been beginners at this tool. We've all hit roadblocks. We've all had to ask a question from time to time to try and get through it. And the chances are, if you are thinking about the question, there are other people who have had that question as well. So please do ask it. And yeah, we'll get straight into it. So today's session, like I said, is all about model-driven apps. So we're going to learn how we create a model-driven app, because it's slightly different from how we might create a Canvas app. How we add pages to a model-driven app and the different types of pages we have available. We're even going to look at one of the new preview features, which is generative pages, which is really cool. We're going to look at how we customize some of the standard pages and how that interacts with Dataverse tables, which we looked at in the last session of the My First series. How we customize forms for our model-driven apps, which is going to impact how we interact with our data inside of model-driven apps. And then we'll get onto how we add components inside of our model-driven apps. And this is something that can really make your apps special, make them stand out a little bit and do some of the really funky stuff that you can see out there. And then, as always, we'll have our discussion session. These My First sessions, if you've seen the previous ones, have a relatively similar format. We won't be doing Death by PowerPoint. It'll be live demos. As always, with live demos, sometimes some things can go wrong. So we're going to start with how we create a model-driven app. And that being the case, we are then going to move on to what we might see when we come into a Canvas app, into Power Apps, and how we get to the point of making a model-driven app. So, as you might expect, model-driven apps are part of the Power Apps part of the Power Platform. But when we come into make.powerapps.com, we land on our homepage, there doesn't seem to be an easy way to create a model-driven app. We've seen previously that the way to create a Canvas app is to come over to the left-hand side and hit create. But all of these options here produce Canvas apps. What we're looking at today is a model-driven app. So how do we create a model-driven app? Well, to create a model-driven app, you have to create them inside of something called a solution. Now, one of our options on the left-hand side over here is this solutions option. So if we click over here, just as a brief point, solutions are essentially a way of grouping kind of things that you build together, such as Power Automate flows, Canvas apps, Dataverse tables, all together in one space to kind of collect them there. Now, last session, we created two tables when we were looking at Dataverse tables, and our first look at them, called dogs, and kennels. When we create those tables, we did a few things in terms of customizing views, forms, and other bits. And we were editing a lot of the data through kind of just directly going to the table, interacting with it, which was a bit funky. Now, let's say in this scenario, we want to build a solution that allows us to track dogs against kennels. We could build that in a Canvas app. That would take a lot of time. Model-driven apps are great for data-driven kind of solutions, like tracking dogs against kennels. You can see here I've already got a model-driven app that was pre-created. But if we want to create a model-driven app, we have to come into a solution, and then we hit New, and then we go to App, and then Model-driven app. And then we get the kind of relatively similar interface in terms of how we would create a Canvas app, and that we have to give the app a name. We're going to call this dog tracking. We provide the app a description, and then as usual we have our advanced options. You can use components from a custom solution, which allows you to do a few things. For the sake of this, we're not going to take that. We're just going to hit create because we're going to be creating a standard model driven app. So once we hit create, we let the system do its thing. Now, while that's busy loading the app up, a bit of background around model-driven apps. Model-driven apps, like I said, are very good at data-driven kind of mass data processing admin applications. They don't allow you the same level of customizability in terms of how the app looks like as Canvas apps do. With Canvas apps, obviously, we saw in previous sessions that you had to, add every control that you wanted, set the colors of them and everything else. Model-driven apps have a very standard kind of design to them. We'll go through that when we kind of add pages and what that design looks like. But what it means is you can create an app very, very quickly based upon the data and other bits that you kind of use. Now, when you first come into a model-driven app, the interface that you get is, again, relatively similar to a Canvas app. You have the main kind of Canvas area where you'll see a example of what your app is going to look like. You have the kind of navigation menus down here. So we've got pages, data, automation, and agents, which allows us to add certain things in to our app. And then we have the properties pane over on the right here. So you can see there, we've got our app name, our description. You can obviously create a description using AI. You can set the icon for your app and then look at what the tile preview is going to be. And then we have kind of our control bar up at the top, which allows us to do things like add comments, save it, publish it, preview it, and do a few of the settings options. So again, a very relatively similar interface as to what we're used to seeing in Canvas apps. But we're not working with screens here. When we look at the view on the left-hand side, we're working with something called pages. Well, what is a page? How do we add one? Well, a page is just a way of viewing information inside of our model-driven app. And to add one, we come over here on the left-hand side. We've got the pages option. That's our standard one. And we've got the option up here to add page. But we just press the button. And then we get a few options. So we've got the describe a page option. This is the generative pages option. I'm going to show this last. We've got Dataverse table. That's because model-driven apps work specifically with Dataverse table data. So if we're wanting to create a model-driven app out of a SQL database, that's not going to be achievable unless you've created virtual tables for that SQL database and it's being hosted in Dataverse. We then have a few other options around web resources, navigation links, dashboards, and custom pages. What we're going to do for now is we're going to look at how we just add a standard Dataverse table page. So we're going to click Dataverse table here. And it's going to ask us to add a table. Now, we've got a list of all the tables that we have in here. We have also the option to create new tables. When we look at creating new tables, if you want to have an awareness of that, we do have the recording for my first Dataverse table now being processed. That'll be uploaded shortly. Give that a look. That'll tell you how Dataverse tables work and how we work with them. But for the sake of adding a page to a model-driven app, we find the Dataverse table that we want to add. In this case, I want my dogs table. And then we hit add. There is this option down here called show in navigation. Now that's important. If I hit add, you'll see that my dogs table appears there. It's underneath a navigation area. And then now I've got a preview of my app. I've now added a page based upon a Dataverse table to my app. What that allows me to do is actually interact with the data in here. So there we go. Dog name, owner, things like that. All able to be seen in there and all able to be used. So right now, technically, because I've added this page, I now have an application that gives me create, read, update, delete permission, the capability for my dogs table. I can see here, I can click on Bella, I can go in, I can delete it, I can change the dog's name, do what I need to do. That's all well and good, but what decides how this looks? What decides how this section looks when we click on? Well, that's this bit over here. We've got dogs view and dogs form. Dogs view is this page. So if I click on that, it's then going to ask me whether I want to save. I'm going to hit save and continue. What this does is it takes you to the view editing interface for that Dataverse table. So right now for the view, I'm going to bring that across and hit kennel. And hey, I also want to find out who the owner is. And I'm going to hit save and publish. And once that's published, we can then hit the back button, go back to our application, and we'll see that the page in our application has updated to reflect the changes in the view that we've provided. So right here. That's going to load the preview. And because I've made changes to that view, they're now reflected in the application. So worthwhile noting, like I said, model-driven apps are driven off of Dataverse tables. And when we were creating these Dataverse tables previously, we edited the views and the forms for some of these tables. And that's how we control how our model-driven app Dataverse table pages look. Now, I want to change what data is displayed when I come into the form. So again, over on the left-hand side, hitting the pencil icon takes me over to the main form view and gives me the ability to edit it. I'm going to say, hey, I want that to be kennel. And actually, I want the owner to appear in this header option up here. Perfect. Save and publish. And again, wait for that to save and publish. Once it's done, we can go back to our application. And when we click into a record, we can see there that the changes I have made on the form have updated. So we've been able to add a Dataverse table page. That's all well and good. We've got a form and a view for that Dataverse table. But we can see on the navigation menu in our model-driven app that it's got this new group bit. And we don't like that new group bit. We actually want to name this. Well, this is where a lot of the work gets done. So we have the navigation, which is very, very similar to the tree view from your Canvas app. It shows you what's in your app and allows you to select it. And then using the properties pane on the right-hand side, rename it. So we're going to call this dog management. And there we go. We can see that that's updated. If I click on the dogs view here, we can take a look at it and we can go, hey, let's say there's the views, charts. If I go to settings, I want to change the icon. I'm going to use a web resource. And I'm going to say, just for the joys, I'm going to use the Copilot icon. And there we go. What we should see, once this updates, is that icon changes over here and it should eventually change here. Once we preview the app. And there we go. We can see the icons change. So we're actually able to change how our navigation looks using this option here on the right-hand side. Now, I've got my dogs Dataverse table page in. That's all well and good. I now, skipping ahead here, bear with. So I now want to add in my kennels page. So again, similar. We come in, we find our table, we hit show navigation. Now, if I leave this unticked, there's that generative page again. We're going to remove that for now. If I leave this unticked, you can see that it doesn't appear in the navigation section of my app, but it has been added to the app. Now, what that means is we can use that kind of table inside of the application and have it referenced from other forms and other such items. For now, I want this to be added to my navigation, so I'm going to hit the little three dots here and hit add to navigation. And there we go. There's my kennels table with the kennel access date that we configured last session and the view that we configured last session as well, alongside the form. Because we've already done that work, we've already customized these forms and these views for this table. Now adding them to the app, they're already there. We don't have to worry too much about them. That's the most common page that tends to get used in model-driven apps, is a Dataverse table page. But obviously, as you can see from the new option, we have a load of others. So web resource page. Well, what these allow you to do is basically create a page based upon an HTML web page. So I don't have one pre-selected, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for Copilot disclaimer, and I'm going to call this in a new sub area. There. So what that's going to do is that's going to render that web resource on the page there. This is useful for things like HTML web resources that you might want to use inside of your app. If you want to display a specific HTML page for information or other items, you've got the ability to do that. The navigation link, I personally really like this one. This allows you to put in a URL. I'm going to use Google. There we are. And what it means is that when your user clicks on that navigation URL, it's going to open up a new tab with that link in. Very, very useful for if you have an external web hosted system that you want them to access. You can then put that into your app. The other new option that we have on there is dashboard. Now, dashboards are something that you can create with Dataverse tables. We discussed them in the Dataverse tables thing. They're a collection of charts and graphs that's based on the data inside of that kind of table, and you can gather them all together and then drop them in. What this means is I can pop in, let's say, an assets over time dashboard here, and it's going to render here. And I'm able to see, hey, assets by location, active assets. This is a dashboard that is part of another solution that I have. But we can see that adding that dashboard in has added the two tables that it relates to into the app. So this is what I meant when I said that you can add a table into the app without having it in the navigation. Those two tables aren't going to appear in the navigation, but this dashboard relies on those two tables, so they need to be present inside of the application, essentially as data sources. So you can see here in our app, there we go, asset dog inspection kennel. In the environment is all the data that we've got there. So that's the dashboard. Custom page. Custom page is a very cool page. It allows us to embed a Canvas app inside of a model-driven app. Why might you want to do that? Well, there's a few situations I can think of. I mean, personally, I've used it recently for allowing an individual to run a on start flow for a Canvas app from inside of a model-driven app. There's a load of different pages there, so we can look at, for instance, overview. If I add this, that overview app needs to be republished, but essentially it means that we can have an option in here to be able to navigate to a Canvas app and work with a Canvas app inside of a model-driven app. So kind of to some degree blurring that lines of which is better. We see the argument quite regularly of, is it Canvas app or is it model-driven app? I personally prefer model-driven app because, hey, I can use a Canvas app inside of a model-driven app. But that's custom pages. Dataverse table, web resource, navigation, dashboard, and custom page are ones that have been around for a while. They have their uses. The describer page, also known as generative pages, you may have seen some news about this, is a relatively new feature. And I personally think it is really, really cool. What it allows you to do is using natural language prompting. You can see here I'm running GPT-5. You can describe the kind of page you want. So let's say for some reason, I want the individuals who are doing the dog and kennel management to be able to play chess. I could turn around and go, create me a page that allows sampling. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to create a page inside of your application using React and JavaScript. So it is using Procode elements here. As you can see, as it's going through, it's generating that. And hey, self-play chess. It gives you a preview of what your page is going to look like. It gives you the code there. And do you know what? I'm going to give this a whirl. I'm gonna say, yep, that looks perfect to me. We're going to say, what's the title? We're going to call it Self Chess. And then we're going to save and publish. Obviously, this is quite a probably non-business usage for this, but it's to show you kind of what it's capable of. And obviously, you can then continue to prompt if you don't think the page is going to do what you need it to do. It can also do things like 3D modeling and a few other implications I've seen of it. But what it allows us to do is use the power of kind of Copilot and natural language processing to actually build something out of Procode pretty quickly. So, hey, pawn there. I wonder if it's actually respected the rules. Can I move anything else? It's picked up on the rules of chess, which is great. Let's see. Is this going to work for me to do that? Yep. Let's see if it clearly doesn't know all the rules, so we've got to go back and readjust it, right? Generative Pages is a preview feature. Be very much aware of that. Preview features are liable to change, but it gives us that ability to really work with kind of Procode. For anybody who knows JavaScript and React and has built PCF controls, this could be really, really powerful, right? But those are the different types of pages we have available to us in our model-driven app. Now, I mentioned about the design of model-driven apps all being relatively similar. So this here is the model-driven app that we've just created. We can see that we've got a menu bar up at the top when users use it, a set of data there, navigation down the left-hand side, and bits around recent and pinned. Now, when we looked at my solution previously, I had another app that I'd very quickly just put together, nothing too special here, called dog adoption tracking. If I were to edit that, and then we can see that dog adoption tracking here looks pretty much exactly the same as the other app. So if we preview it, we'll have the same controls. We'll have the navigation down the side, you'll have home, recent, pinned, you'll have group listings, and you'll have bits around kind of the information that we've got available to us. Now, this is a generative page. Obviously, generative pages don't have that menu bar up at the top. But if we did have that menu bar there, then we'd be able to use it. So, we've seen how we add pages. We've also briefly seen how we customize views and how we customize forms within our application. And that's all well and good. And model-driven apps are great for some of their design bits, but really it doesn't look like there's much customization to do. This is where the next step in the process comes along, which is adding components. So I've mentioned briefly about React, JavaScript, PCF controls, right? Well, actually, there are some pre-built components and PCF controls that Microsoft provides us out of the box for us to use to make our apps just look that little bit different, especially model-driven apps. And these are applied to views and forms within our application. So right here, I have this dogs view here. I don't have the ability to edit any of these fields. What happens if I need to change the kennel on all of these? Well, from a user perspective, I'm going to have to click into every single record, change the kennel, come back. That's going to be tiresome, boring, especially if I've got around about 200 dogs that I need to change the kennel for. So, as someone who's creating a model-driven app, I want to give the users the ability to edit things inside of this view. So to do that, we need to add a component. So to add a component to a view, We come into the actual view itself. So from the model-driven app, we come to dogs view, we hit the pencil icon, and we go to components up here. We hit add a component. And we've only got 2. We've got CC grid name and calendar. Now there's many more than that. We click on get more components. And then we have a load of them in here. So there's a load that are built by Microsoft. One of my personal favorites is the Power Apps Grid Control. So that's what I'm going to use here. I'm going to hit add. And hey, great. That's now been added as a control, which is a component that I can add to this. So I'm going to hit Power Apps Grid Control. And it's going to say, hey, we want to be able to do a few things. This child items thing is a unique one. It allows us to see the child items for a parent record inside of a view. Now, in the case of obviously the dogs view, the child item in this situation is the kennel. So I'm going to just quickly find my kennels table, which is there. And I'm going to choose the view that I want to use. Obviously, in this case, we only have active kennels. And I'm going to choose the child items parent ID. Now, in this case, excuse me one moment, I've gotten it the wrong way around. We should be on the kennels view, not the dogs view. This is a good example of why you should always write an entity relationship diagram when you're building a solution. So, again, components, add a component, get more components. Power Apps Grid Control. There we are. Click. Child items. This one's going to be dogs. There. Active dogs is the view. And it's going to be kennel there. And accessible labels. Hey, enable editing. There's that feature. Yes, I want to enable editing in the grid. Yes, I want them to be able to edit items in the child grid, which will be the dogs. Yes, I want to enable filtering. Yes, I want to enable sorting. Oh, do I want to enable grouping? Yeah, let's give them the option to group data together. Am I going to allow them to reorder columns? Again, as a point of reference, this is preview. Be careful around the preview stuff. Occasionally it can change or it can go wrong. But once I've done all that, I can hit done. I can hit save. And, well, it doesn't look like it's done anything. But for the purpose of this, I hit save and publish. And once that's done, if we go back to our app, we'll see that the way the app is displayed is slightly different to how we left it. So we're going to go back. And we're going to go to kennels. And hey, this looks different to what the dogs one does. The kennels one has a little drop down. I can see, because we enabled the child items, I can now see the dogs that we've got here. I can click into the records and I can see them. Or I can change the kennel access date, for instance, because we've enabled editing. Gives us a little bit of difference in terms of how things set up. Now, this is a very basic example of adding a component. There are a number of other components, and you can create your own components by building a PCF control using React and other frameworks to be able to create things. But there's a lot more that these components can do. More specifically, they can make your app look just that little bit more colorful. Model-driven apps can sometimes, occasionally, be a little bit dull. Now, if I look at this and I hit play on this one, which is an application that I've worked on previously, and I come into he says, as the choice options don't turn up, and I come in here and I hit that. So that's a slightly differently configured Power Apps Grid Control, which means that all these status options that we have here, that when we configure a choice option in Dataverse, we set a color against it. They are now visible inside of my application. I can very quickly see, hey, I've got colors against things. which allows to do a few other bits. And then again, I've got the option to drop down things and, click into them and see the child items and do everything I need to do. So that's all well and good. We've made it so that our kind of views look really good, work how we need them to, and maybe look just that little bit prettier. Outstanding. But what about our forms? What can we do with them? These ways of seeing data. Is there a way to make them look pretty? Well, yes. In a very similar fashion to the views, we can add components to these. So I'm going to come into this kennels form here. And then we're going to look over on the left-hand side, and we're going to go to this section here, all these components. Now, there's a number of things in terms of component formatting. We can change the tabs that are available up here. So I can just drag in and say, hey, one column tab. And I'm going to call this tab kennels. Oh, sorry, dogs. And I want to display some information on there. Well, I've got this subgrid component. Very useful component. We can drag that in. And we can see, leave this show related records ticked and go, I want to see the related dogs to this record. Change the label on it. Hide it, do whatever we want to do. And then save and publish. Now, again, a simple example of adding a component to a form, but we have a load of components in there. Things like timelines, quick view forms, display options to be able to display a calendar, or even embed a Canvas app onto a form, show an external website or an HTML resource or a very specific image. Give them the ability to do things like pen inputs so they can sign things on the actual form as well. Star ratings or rich text editor controls, all these things that we have available to us as out-of-the-box kind of components. And then we also have the option for get more components. So things like, audit details or reporting, all these things that are in there as we need them. We can add them, hit save and publish. And the differences with the form editing controls, you can tend to see the change in how the control works and how it's going to change the form at the point of editing it, unlike the view. But once we've done that, if I come into kennels and I go to kennel 15 and I look at dogs, there's my subgrid control. All well and good. I've added a component to a form. But that is, in essence, a first look at the model-driven apps space, how you might create one. We've gone through how we create a model-driven app, how we add pages, the different types of pages, how the new generative pages feature works, how we customize views, how we customize forms, and how we add components into our views and forms and into our model-driven apps to make them just look a little bit better and maybe providing a little bit extra bit of functionality. With all that being the case, I hope you found that useful. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments.